When Lieutenant Marcus Kane deliberately tampered with Sergeant Ellie Ross's rifle scope just minutes before the International Military Marksmanship Championship Finals, he thought he was ensuring that the amateur who had somehow made it this far would finally be exposed as the fraud he believed her to be. But what he didn't anticipate was that his sabotage would trigger a demonstration of pure shooting skill so extraordinary that it would redefine what experts thought was humanly possible with a rifle. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The tension at Fort Benning's premier shooting range was thick enough to cut with a bayonet. 18 of the world's most elite military marksmen had gathered for the championship's final round, each representing their nation's best shooters in a competition that had attracted global attention. The course of fire was legendary in its difficulty: 18 precision targets at distances ranging from 300 to 1,200 meters, with varying wind conditions, elevation changes and time constraints that had defeated even Olympic-level shooters. Sergeant Ellie Ross had arrived at this moment through a combination of flawless preliminary scores and what most competitors dismissed as extraordinary luck. At 26, she was the youngest shooter in the competition, the only woman in the finals, and according to the whispered conversations around the range, completely out of her depth. Her military occupational specialty was supply logistics, not infantry or special operations like every other finalist. She had never attended an advanced marksmanship school, never served in combat roles, and according to conventional wisdom, had no business competing against soldiers whose entire careers had been built around precision shooting. But Ellie's path to the championship had been anything but accidental. While others had focused on formal training and established techniques, she had spent years developing an intuitive understanding of ballistics, wind reading, and weapon systems that transcended traditional instruction. Her approach combined mathematical precision with an almost supernatural ability to read environmental conditions and adapt to equipment variations that would confuse shooters with decades of experience. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Lieutenant Kane represented everything that institutional marksmanship training could produce. A graduate of the Army Marksmanship Unit's most advanced programs, he had won numerous competitions and held several base records for precision shooting. His career had been built on textbook technique, rigorous training schedules, and the kind of methodical approach that military instruction manuals recommended. He had trained for 8 years to reach this level of competition, and he wasn't about to watch some logistics sergeant steal a championship that belonged to real marksmen. The sabotage was subtle but devastating. While Ellie was away from the firing line during the mandatory equipment inspection, Kane had made minute adjustments to her rifle scope's windage and elevation settings. The changes were small enough to avoid detection during casual inspection, but significant enough to throw off her point of impact by several inches at long range. For a precision shooting competition where success was measured in fractions of an inch, such interference would normally mean automatic elimination. What Kane hadn't anticipated was that Ellie's shooting style didn't rely entirely on scope precision. Years of informal practice had taught her to read her weapon's behavior through subtle cues that most marksmen never learned to recognize: the slight variations in recoil pattern that indicated scope misalignment, the barely perceptible difference in trigger pull that suggested mechanical interference, and the instinctive understanding of how environmental factors would interact with equipment problems. The championship's final stage began with all 18 shooters positioned at their assigned firing points, their rifles prepared for what would be remembered as one of the most challenging courses of fire in competitive shooting history. The targets were arranged in a complex pattern that required rapid transitions between different distances and shooting positions, with wind conditions that changed unpredictably across the range. Ellie approached her rifle with the systematic preparation that had carried her through every preliminary round, but something felt wrong the moment she settled into her shooting position. The rifle's balance was slightly off, the scope's eye relief seemed different, and when she acquired her first target, the crosshairs didn't align where her instincts expected them to be. A less experienced shooter might have assumed the problem was nervousness or competition pressure, but Ellie's extensive practice had taught her to recognize equipment anomalies. That's when she noticed Lieutenant Kane watching her with barely concealed satisfaction, his expression carrying the anticipation of someone expecting to witness a spectacular failure. The realization hit her with crystal clarity: someone had deliberately tampered with her equipment, and Kane's body language suggested he knew exactly what was about to happen. But instead of panic or confusion, Ellie felt a cold determination settle over her. She had faced equipment problems during countless practice sessions and had learned to adapt her shooting technique to compensate for mechanical variations that would defeat other shooters. If someone thought that sabotaging her scope would expose her as an amateur, they were about to discover that true marksmanship transcended dependence on perfect equipment. The range officer's voice cut through the desert air with final instructions: "Shooters, you have 45 minutes to engage all 18 targets. The course of fire begins now." The championship that would define careers and determine international bragging rights had begun, but for Ellie Ross it had become something much more personal: a chance to prove that skill, adaptability, and determination could overcome any attempt at sabotage. As she chambered her first round and acquired her initial target, Ellie made a decision that would shock everyone watching. Instead of struggling with the sabotaged scope, she would demonstrate a level of marksmanship that relied on instinct, environmental reading, and pure shooting skill. Lieutenant Kane's attempt to destroy her chances had just triggered the most extraordinary display of precision shooting that anyone present would ever witness. The first shot rang out across the range, and the spotting scope confirmed what Ellie had known the moment she pulled the trigger. Despite the scope tampering, her round had struck dead center. But this was just the beginning. 17 more targets waited, each one an opportunity to prove that true marksmanship came from within, not from equipment, and that sometimes the most devastating response to sabotage was simply to be better than anyone thought possible. The Fort Benning shooting complex buzzed with the kind of tension that only accompanied events where national pride and individual careers hung in the balance. 18 competitors representing the world's elite military marksmen had gathered around the firing line, each aware that they were participating in what many considered the most prestigious precision shooting competition in military history. But beneath the professional atmosphere, whispered conversations revealed a consistent theme: Sergeant Ellie Ross didn't belong here. Master Sergeant Carlos Rivera, the U.S. Army's senior representative and a man whose marksmanship credentials filled an entire file folder, made no attempt to hide his skepticism. "I've been shooting competitively for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone advance this far without formal sniper training or combat experience," he said to the group of competitors gathered around the equipment check station. "There's a difference between getting lucky in preliminaries and performing under championship pressure." Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, representing the Marine Corps and holder of multiple service records, nodded in agreement while examining his precision rifle. Ross's preliminary scores were impressive, but this final stage is completely different. 18 targets at varying distances with wind conditions that change every few minutes. This requires the kind of instinctive shooting that takes years of specialized training to develop. His tone carried the authority of someone who had spent a decade perfecting techniques that most soldiers never even attempted to learn. Lieutenant Kane positioned himself where he could observe both the conversation and Ellie's preparation routine, his expression reflecting the confidence of someone who believed he understood the natural order of competitive marksmanship. "She's a supply sergeant who spends her days managing inventory and requisitions," he said with barely concealed dismissal. "I respect anyone who makes it this far, but there's a reason why precision shooting competitions are usually won by specialists who have dedicated their entire careers to marksmanship." The international competitors were equally skeptical, though their doubts were expressed with the diplomatic courtesy expected at multinational events. Captain James Morrison from the British Army, whose shooting achievements included several Commonwealth Games medals, observed Ellie's unconventional preparation methods with obvious curiosity. "Her technique is certainly unique," he commented to his teammates. "But unique doesn't necessarily translate to effective under pressure. This competition has eliminated shooters with decades more experience." Sergeant Major Hans Weber from the German Army, a veteran of multiple international competitions and holder of several European shooting records, was more direct in his assessment. I have observed many shooters over the years, and those who advance without traditional training usually reach a plateau where natural ability cannot compensate for lack of technical foundation, he said, while adjusting his own rifle. The final stage will reveal whether preliminary success was skill or fortune, but the most pointed skepticism came from within Ellie's own unit. First Sergeant Patricia Hayes, who had reluctantly supported Ellie's competition participation, made her concerns known to anyone who would listen. I supported her because her preliminary scores were undeniable, but I'm worried we're setting her up for a very public failure, she confided to the other senior enlisted personnel. This kind of competition attracts media attention, and if she performs poorly, it reflects on our entire training program. The technical aspects of the competition added weight to the doubters' arguments. The championship's final course of fire had been designed by some of the world's most experienced marksmanship instructors, specifically to challenge every aspect of precision shooting, target acquisition, under time pressure, rapid transitions between different shooting positions, compensation for complex wind patterns, and the psychological pressure of performing flawlessly when everyone was watching. Range Master Sergeant David Kim, who had supervised international shooting competitions for over a decade, explained the course's complexity to visiting officials and media representatives. What makes this course so challenging isn't just the technical difficulty, it's the mental pressure of knowing that a single missed shot can eliminate years of preparation and training, he said, while pointing out various target positions. We've designed these stages to test not just shooting ability, but the kind of mental resilience that comes from extensive competitive experience. The equipment requirements added another layer of complexity that seemed to favor shooters with extensive technical training. Each competitor was required to use their own rifle system, but environmental conditions could change rapidly throughout the course of fire, requiring constant adjustments to scope settings, ammunition selection, and shooting technique. This isn't just about pulling a trigger, explained Master Sergeant Rivera. It's about making real-time calculations involving ballistics, meteorology, and equipment performance while maintaining perfect composure under pressure. The international media covering the event had picked up on the narrative of Ellie's unconventional path to the finals, but their coverage reflected the same skepticism expressed by her fellow competitors. Military Times correspondent Jessica Walsh interviewed several experts who questioned whether someone without traditional marksmanship credentials could compete at this level. While Sergeant Ross's preliminary performance has been impressive, competitive shooting experts suggest that the finals will require a different level of technical expertise and psychological preparation, she reported. The medical and psychological screening required for all finalists had revealed interesting differences in Ellie's profile compared to other competitors. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the competition sports psychologist, noted unusual patterns in Ellie's stress response and decision-making assessments. Most elite marksmen show very similar psychological profiles developed through years of competitive shooting, she observed. Sergeant Ross's results suggest a different type of mental approach that could either be a significant advantage or a major liability under championship pressure. Even the support staff and range personnel had formed opinions about Ellie's chances based on their observations during preliminary rounds. She definitely shoots differently from the others, commented Technical Sergeant Lisa Johnson, who managed ammunition and equipment logistics for the competition. Most of these guys have very methodical textbook approaches. Ross seems to rely more on instinct and adaptation, which is impressive when it works but could be problematic if conditions get challenging. The weather forecast for the competition day added another element that seemed to favor experienced competitors over unconventional ones. Meteorologist Captain Robert Torres briefed all participants about expected wind patterns, temperature variations, and humidity changes that would affect ballistic performance throughout the course of fire. These conditions will require constant adjustments based on environmental reading skills that typically take years to develop, he warned. Shooters who rely heavily on equipment settings rather than environmental adaptation may find themselves struggling. As the final preparation period drew to a close, the consensus among competitors, officials, and observers was clear. Sergeant Ellie Ross had achieved something remarkable by reaching the finals, but the championship round would reveal the limits of unconventional talent when faced with the ultimate test of military marksmanship. What none of them anticipated was that their skepticism was about to witness something that would challenge every assumption they held about precision shooting and the relationship between traditional training and exceptional performance. The equipment preparation area buzzed with the methodical activity of 18 elite marksmen conducting final checks on rifles that represented years of customization and thousands of rounds of ammunition used in perfecting their precision. Each weapon was a masterpiece of engineering and personal preference, tuned to its owner's specific shooting style and optimized for the kind of accuracy that separated champions from also-rans. But among all the technical preparation and professional focus, Lieutenant Kane was planning something that would cross every line of competitive integrity. Kane's motivation went deeper than simple competitive rivalry. Throughout his military career, he had watched promotions and recognition go to soldiers who had earned their achievements through what he considered legitimate channels, formal training programs, established career, and institutional validation of their abilities. Ellie Ross represented everything that frustrated him about a system that occasionally rewarded unconventional talent over traditional preparation and proper credentials. The opportunity for sabotage presented itself during the mandatory equipment inspection period when all competitors were required to leave their rifles unattended while participating in a final briefing about range safety and competition procedures. The inspection was conducted by certified range personnel who examined each weapon for safety compliance and regulation conformity, but the process also created a window of time when the rifles were accessible but not directly supervised by their owners. Kane had studied Ellie's rifle setup during preliminary rounds with the attention to detail that characterized his approach to all aspects of marksmanship. Her weapon was a modified Remington 700 chambered in 308 Winchester, equipped with a loopholed variable power scope and customized with a precision trigger system. The rifle itself was unremarkable compared to the exotic equipment used by some competitors, but Ellie's performance suggested she had achieved an unusual level of familiarity with her weapon system. The sabotage itself required both technical knowledge and careful timing. Kane waited until the equipment inspection team had moved to the far end of the firing line, then approached Ellie's rifle with the casual confidence of someone who belonged in the area. His modifications were subtle but devastating, slight adjustments to the scope's windage and elevation turrets that would throw off her point of impact, and a barely detectable loosening of the scope mounting screws that would create inconsistent accuracy. The beauty of Kane's sabotage was its invisibility to casual inspection. The scope adjustments were within the normal range of settings that might be made for different environmental conditions, and the loosened mounting screws would only reveal themselves under the recoil stress of actual shooting. Most importantly, the effects wouldn't be immediately obvious. They would manifest as gradually degrading accuracy that could easily be attributed to shooter error or competition pressure. Master Sergeant Rivera, conducting equipment inspections nearby, noticed Kane's presence but didn't think to question why another competitor was examining someone else's rifle. Making sure everyone's equipment meets specifications, he asked casually, interpreting Kane's actions as the kind of professional interest that experienced shooters often showed in each other's gear. "Just curious about her setup," Kane replied smoothly, stepping away from Ellie's rifle with the satisfied expression of someone who had accomplished exactly what he intended. "She's been shooting some impressive groups, and I wanted to see what kind of equipment she's using." His explanation was plausible enough to avoid suspicion while concealing the true nature of his interest. The competition's technical director, Chief Warrant Officer Mark Stevens, had been observing the interaction from across the equipment area, but his attention was focused on ensuring that all safety protocols were being followed rather than monitoring for potential sabotage. "All competitors need to clear the equipment area for final briefing," he announced, unknowingly providing Kane with perfect cover for his departure from the scene of his tampering. The psychological impact of sabotage often exceeded its technical effects, and Kane was counting on Ellie's inexperience to magnify the disruption when her equipment began malfunctioning.
Less experienced shooters typically became frustrated and confused when their rifles didn't perform as expected, leading to rushed shots and increasingly poor performance as they tried to compensate for problems they didn't understand. Staff Sergeant Chen, who had been adjusting his own rifle nearby, noticed that Kane seemed unusually satisfied as they moved toward the briefing area. "You look confident about the final round," he observed, interpreting Kane's expression as pre-competition focus rather than the satisfaction of successful sabotage. "I think today's going to reveal who really belongs at this level of competition," Kane replied, his words carrying a double meaning that Chen couldn't possibly understand. The lieutenant's confidence wasn't based on his own preparation, it was based on his certainty that he had eliminated his most threatening competition through methods that would never be detected or suspected. The final briefing covered standard competition procedures, safety protocols, and environmental conditions that all competitors needed to understand before beginning the championship round. Range Master Sergeant Kim emphasized the course's difficulty and the precision required for success, but his warnings about equipment reliability and the importance of pre-competition preparation carried special irony given what Kane had done to Ellie's rifle. "Equipment failure during competition is every marksman's nightmare," Kim explained to the assembled competitors. "That's why we require extensive pre-competition testing and why experienced shooters develop backup procedures for dealing with unexpected mechanical problems." His words were intended as general guidance, but they would soon prove prophetic in ways he never intended. Martinez, observing the competitors' body language during the briefing, noted that most shooters showed signs of focused tension mixed with confidence, the psychological state that typically preceded peak performance. Kane's demeanor was particularly interesting because it suggested someone who felt unusually certain about the outcome, though she attributed this to exceptional preparation rather than sabotage. As the briefing concluded and competitors began moving toward their assigned firing positions, Kane positioned himself where he could observe Ellie's initial shots and witness the confusion that he expected would follow when her rifle began misbehaving. He had calculated that the scope problems would become apparent within the first few shots, leading to the kind of visible frustration and declining performance that would validate every skeptic's prediction about her inability to compete at this level. The irony of Kane's sabotage was that it was about to trigger exactly the opposite of what he intended. Instead of exposing Ellie as an amateur who relied too heavily on equipment, his tampering was about to force her to demonstrate a level of pure marksmanship skill that would shock everyone present.
The firing line stretched across Fort Benning's most challenging marksmanship range, like a stage prepared for the world's most demanding performance. 18 shooters took their positions with the methodical precision of professionals who understood that the next 45 minutes would define not only individual careers, but national pride in military marksmanship excellence. The morning air carried the tension of competition mixed with the anticipation of witnessing something historically significant. Ellie approached her designated firing position with the same systematic preparation routine that had carried her through every preliminary round, but something felt different from the moment she settled behind her rifle. The weapon that had felt like an extension of herself during practice now seemed subtly unfamiliar, with small variations in balance and sight picture that her extensively trained instincts immediately recognized as problematic. The first indication of trouble came when she acquired her initial target through the scope. The crosshairs didn't settle where her muscle memory expected them to be, and the sight picture that should have been crystal clear showed slight inconsistencies that suggested mechanical problems. A less experienced shooter might have attributed these anomalies to competition nerves or environmental conditions, but Ellie's thousands of practice rounds had taught her to recognize equipment malfunctions instantly. Rangemaster Sergeant Kim's voice cut through the morning air with final instructions that carried the weight of international competition. "Shooters, you have 45 minutes to engage all 18 targets in numerical order. Wind conditions are variable, distances range from 300 to 1200 meters, and each target must be engaged from the specified shooting position." His words established the parameters of what many considered the most challenging precision shooting course in military competition. As Ellie cycled through her pre-shooting checklist, she noticed Lieutenant Kane positioned at the firing point to her right, his body language suggesting someone who was anticipating a specific outcome rather than focusing on his own performance. The realization struck her with sudden clarity. The equipment problems she was experiencing weren't accidental or coincidental, they were the result of deliberate sabotage by someone who wanted to see her fail. The discovery of sabotage triggered something in Ellie that went beyond competitive determination. Throughout her military career, she had faced skepticism and institutional barriers that suggested her unconventional background made her unsuitable for advanced challenges. But sabotage represented a level of malicious intent that transformed competition into something much more personal, a chance to prove that skill and adaptability could overcome not just doubt but deliberate attempts at destruction. Instead of reporting the equipment tampering or requesting a delay to fix her rifle, Ellie made a decision that would have seemed insane to any conventional marksman. She would shoot the entire course with deliberately sabotaged equipment, demonstrating a level of marksmanship that transcended dependence on perfect mechanical precision. If someone thought that damaging her scope would expose her as an amateur, they were about to witness shooting skills that existed independent of equipment optimization. Master Sergeant Rivera, positioned at the adjacent firing point, noticed Ellie's extended preparation time and assumed she was experiencing typical pre-competition anxiety. "First time at this level can be overwhelming," he offered quietly, his attempt at encouragement based on the assumption that her delay indicated nervousness rather than equipment assessment. "Just focus on your fundamentals and shoot your normal game." "Thank you, Master Sergeant, but I think I've got everything sorted out now," Ellie replied, her voice carrying a calm determination that surprised Rivera. Instead of the anxiety he expected to hear, her tone suggested someone who had just resolved a technical problem and was ready to proceed with complete confidence. Staff Sergeant Chen, whose own preparation had been interrupted by curiosity about the delay at Ellie's position, observed her settling into her shooting stance with what appeared to be renewed focus. "She looks more confident now than she did during equipment check," he commented to Rivera. "Maybe the pressure isn't affecting her as much as everyone expected." The range officer's final countdown began the sequence that would determine international bragging rights and individual careers. "Shooters, prepare for the commencement of fire. You may load and make ready. The course begins in 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, commence firing." The championship round that had attracted global attention was officially underway. Ellie's first shot rang out across the range within seconds of the start signal, followed immediately by the distinctive crack of her bullet striking the 300-meter target. The spotting scope confirmed what she had known the moment she pulled the trigger. Despite the scope's sabotage, her round had struck dead center on the bullseye. But instead of relief or satisfaction, she felt only cold determination to prove that her marksmanship transcended equipment dependencies. Lieutenant Kane's confident expression began to shift as he observed Ellie's first target impact through his peripheral vision. The scope tampering should have caused a significant miss that would have shaken her confidence and led to increasingly poor performance, but the spotting scope showed a perfect center hit that suggested either incredible luck or shooting ability that he hadn't anticipated. Range observers and competition officials began taking notice of Ellie's performance as she engaged her second target at 400 meters. The shot execution was smooth and confident, with none of the hesitation or adjustment that typically characterized shooters dealing with equipment problems. When the spotter called dead center for her second consecutive perfect hit, conversations around the observation area began focusing on her unexpected precision. Dr. Martinez, monitoring competitor stress indicators through biometric equipment, noted unusual readings from Ellie's position. Instead of the elevated stress markers that typically accompanied equipment problems or competition pressure, her physiological indicators suggested someone entering a state of intense focus and controlled calm. "Her stress response is completely different from what we normally see with shooters experiencing difficulties," she observed to the technical staff. Master Sergeant Rivera found himself distracted from his own shooting by the sound pattern of Ellie's shots. Each report was followed within seconds by the distinctive impact sound of bullets striking target, suggesting a level of rapid precision that he had rarely witnessed in competition. "She's shooting faster than anyone else and still hitting center," he noted with growing amazement. As Ellie engaged her third target at 600 meters, the full implications of what was happening began to register with competitors and observers alike. She wasn't just overcoming equipment problems, she was shooting with a level of precision and speed that suggested mastery beyond anything they had expected. Lieutenant Kane's sabotage hadn't exposed an amateur, it had unleashed something extraordinary. The rhythm of Ellie's shooting established a cadence that seemed to hypnotize everyone within earshot. Each shot followed the same precise sequence: acquire target, brief pause for environmental assessment, smooth trigger pull, immediate impact, and fluid transition to the next firing position. What should have been a challenging course requiring careful calculation and frequent equipment adjustments had become a demonstration of pure marksmanship that defied every assumption about precision shooting. Target number 4 at 700 meters presented the first significant challenge of wind compensation, with crosswinds gusting unpredictably across the range. Most competitors were taking additional time to read environmental conditions and adjust their scope settings accordingly, but Ellie's approach was different. Instead of relying on mechanical scope adjustments that she knew were compromised, she was calculating wind compensation through hold-off techniques and instinctive environmental reading. Lieutenant Kane's growing confusion was evident to anyone observing his firing position. His own shooting had become increasingly erratic as he found himself distracted by Ellie's unexpected success. The sabotage that should have eliminated his most threatening competition was instead highlighting shooting abilities that he hadn't known existed. Each perfect impact from her position represented a failure of his plan and a demonstration of skills that challenged his understanding of marksmanship. Range Master Sergeant Kim found himself abandoning his normal observation routine to focus entirely on Ellie's performance. In 30 years of supervising shooting competitions, I've never seen anyone maintain this level of precision while shooting this rapidly, he commented to the other range officials. Most competitors at this level require significant time between shots for environmental assessment and equipment adjustment. The international competitors were beginning to take notice of the unusual activity at Ellie's position. Captain Morrison from the British Army had paused his own shooting to observe what appeared to be a shooting exhibition rather than a typical competition performance. "She's engaging targets faster than some shooters can acquire them," he noted to his teammates. "Either she's incredibly lucky, or we're witnessing something completely outside normal competition standards." Target number 5 at 800 meters required a significant elevation change and a transition to a different shooting position, challenges that typically slowed competitors considerably as they adjusted equipment and re-established their sight picture. Ellie's transition was fluid and rapid, with a kind of automatic precision that suggested thousands of hours of practice under varied conditions. Staff Sergeant Chen had abandoned any pretense of focusing on his own performance and was openly watching Ellie's shooting sequence. "She's not making any scope adjustments between targets," he observed with growing amazement. "Most of us are constantly tweaking our settings for different distances and conditions, but she's shooting like her equipment is perfectly zeroed for every engagement." The media representatives covering the competition had begun focusing their attention on what was clearly becoming the story of the championship. Jessica Walsh from Military Times was documenting what appeared to be a record-setting performance by the competition's most unlikely finalist. Sergeant Ross is currently 5 for 5 with perfect center hits, shooting significantly faster than any other competitor while maintaining precision that exceeds Olympic standards, she reported. Dr. Martinez's biometric monitoring equipment was registering readings that challenged her understanding of competitive stress responses. Instead of the typical pattern of elevated anxiety followed by focused calm, Ellie's indicators showed someone entering what sports psychologists called flow state, a condition of optimal performance where conscious control gave way to unconscious mastery. Target number 6 at 500 meters represented a return to moderate range but with challenging crosswinds that were causing problems for other competitors. Several shooters had already recorded marginal hits that would significantly impact their final scores, while others were taking extended time to analyze wind patterns before engaging. Ellie's shot came within 30 seconds of reaching the position, followed immediately by the spotter's call of dead center. Master Sergeant Rivera had completely stopped his own shooting to watch what he was beginning to recognize as potentially historic performance. "She's shooting like someone who has memorized every environmental factor on this range," he said to the competitors within earshot.
The wind reading, distance compensation, and Ellie's on-target acquisition are happening faster than most people can think through the calculations. Technical Sergeant Johnson, managing ammunition resupply for the competition, noted that Ellie's ammunition consumption was significantly lower than other competitors. Most shooters are using sighting shots and making adjustments between targets, she observed. Ross is shooting once per target and moving on, which suggests either incredible confidence or shooting ability that doesn't require confirmation shots. Target number 7 at 900 meters tested the limits of equipment precision and shooter skill with wind patterns that change significantly at longer distances. The target required not just accurate range estimation but sophisticated understanding of how environmental conditions affected bullet trajectory over extended flight paths. Ellie's engagement time was under 40 seconds from position acquisition to target impact. Lieutenant Kane's performance had degraded to the point where range officials were beginning to notice his unusual shooting pattern. Instead of the methodical professional approach that characterized elite marksmen, his shots were coming irregularly with extended delays that suggested concentration problems. His sabotage plan was backfiring in ways he hadn't anticipated, affecting his own performance more than his intended target. The spotting scopes confirmed what observers were beginning to realize: 7 targets, 7 perfect center hits, shooting speeds that exceeded normal competition standards, and precision that suggested equipment and environmental factors weren't limiting her performance. Range officials were beginning to discuss whether they were witnessing a new competitive record in the making. Captain Torres, providing meteorological updates to competitors, noted that environmental conditions were becoming more challenging as the morning progressed. Wind patterns are becoming less predictable and thermal effects are starting to impact long-range accuracy, he announced. Shooters should expect increasing difficulty with environmental compensation for remaining targets. But Ellie's performance seemed unaffected by the deteriorating conditions. Target number 8 at 600 meters was engaged and struck dead center within 25 seconds of her arrival at the shooting position, maintaining the same rhythm and precision that had characterized her entire course of fire. The impossible was becoming routine, and everyone present was beginning to understand that they were witnessing something that would redefine their understanding of human marksmanship capability.
The halfway point of the championship course had arrived, and the statistical impossibility of Ellie's performance was beginning to sink in among competitors and observers. 8 targets, 8 perfect center hits, with shooting times that were shattering every existing record for precision marksmanship competition. What had started as skepticism about an unqualified competitor was transforming into awe at a demonstration of shooting skill that transcended every established understanding of human capability with a rifle. Rangemaster Sergeant Kim found himself in the unprecedented situation of having to verify that competition rules were being followed, not because of violations, but because the performance being displayed seemed to exceed what those rules had been designed to accommodate. In all my years of competition management, I've never seen sustained precision at this level combined with shooting speeds that would be impressive even for casual target practice, he confided to the other range officials. Lieutenant Kane's original confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of dread as he realized that his sabotage hadn't just failed, it had triggered a demonstration of marksmanship that was making him look amateurish by comparison. His own shooting had deteriorated so significantly that he was falling behind the pace required to complete the course within the time limit, while his intended victim was performing at levels that defied explanation. Target number 9 at 1,000 meters represented the beginning of the course's most challenging phase, where extreme precision shooting met unpredictable environmental conditions. At this distance, factors like wind speed variations, temperature gradients, and even the Earth's rotation began affecting bullet trajectory in ways that required both sophisticated calculation and instinctive understanding of ballistic principles. Master Sergeant Rivera had abandoned any pretense of competition and was frankly staring at Ellie's shooting position with the fascination of someone witnessing something that shouldn't be possible. "She's engaging 1,000-meter targets faster than I can acquire them through my scope," he said to Staff Sergeant Chen. "Either she's developed some kind of supernatural targeting ability or she's operating on a completely different level of marksmanship than anything I've seen." The international competitors were having similar reactions. Sergeant Major Weber from the German army had stopped shooting entirely to observe what he was beginning to recognize as a potentially historic performance. In European competition, shooters who achieve this level of precision typically require 2 to 3 minutes per target for environmental assessment and equipment adjustment, he noted. She is completing the same process in under 30 seconds while maintaining perfect accuracy. Martina's biometric monitoring was registering readings that challenged established understanding of human performance under competitive stress. Her physiological indicators suggest someone operating in an optimal performance state that typically lasts only minutes, not the sustained period we're observing, she reported to competition officials. This level of focused calm combined with rapid precision execution is outside normal human performance parameters. Target number 10 at 800 meters required a position change that involved moving to elevated terrain with different wind patterns and sight lines. Most competitors were spending significant time re-establishing their sight picture and adjusting for the new environmental conditions, but Ellie's transition was accomplished with the same fluid precision that had characterized her entire performance. The media coverage was shifting from routine competition reporting to documentation of what appeared to be a historic achievement in military marksmanship. Jessica Walsh was providing live updates to Military Times readers about performance standards being shattered by a competitor who wasn't supposed to be capable of this level of shooting. Current pace puts Sergeant Ross on track for a perfect score achieved in record time, which would represent the first time in competition history that anyone has achieved maximum precision while setting speed records. Captain Morrison from the British Army found himself questioning his own understanding of marksmanship limitations. What we're observing challenges fundamental assumptions about the relationship between speed and accuracy in precision shooting, he said to his fellow competitors. Traditional training emphasizes deliberate methodical shooting because rapid precision was considered mutually exclusive. She's proving that assumption wrong. Technical Sergeant Johnson noted that Ellie's ammunition expenditure remained exactly 1 round per target with no sighting shots, confirmation shots or missed shots requiring follow-up. Every other competitor is using backup ammunition for adjustments and confirmations, she observed. Ross is shooting like someone who has perfect knowledge of every environmental factor and equipment variable. Target number 11 at 1200 meters represented the course's maximum distance challenge where atmospheric conditions could cause bullet drift measured in feet rather than inches. At this extreme range, even Olympic-level shooters typically required multiple ranging shots and extensive environmental assessment before attempting a scoring shot. Ellie's approach time to the position was under 15 seconds. Lieutenant Kane watched through his scope as Ellie acquired the 1200-meter target with the same casual precision she had displayed throughout the course. His sabotage had been specifically designed to create problems at longer ranges where scope precision became critical and minor equipment variations would be magnified into significant accuracy problems. Instead, he was witnessing shooting that seemed completely independent of equipment limitations. The crack of Ellie's rifle echoed across the range, followed by the distinctive sound of bullet impact at extreme distance. The spotting scope confirmed what everyone was beginning to expect but still found incredible: another perfect center hit, achieved in under 40 seconds from position acquisition. 11 targets, 11 perfect shots with no indication that the remaining 7 targets would present any greater challenge. Range officials were beginning to discuss the implications of what they were witnessing. Chief Warrant Officer Stevens approached Range Master Sergeant Kim with concerns about competition integrity. "We need to verify that equipment regulations are being followed and that no unauthorized modifications are giving any competitor an unfair advantage," he said, though his tone suggested he was grasping for explanations rather than identifying actual violations. "I've been watching her rifle and shooting technique throughout the course," Kim replied. "What we're seeing appears to be pure shooting skill at a level that exceeds our normal experience." Dr. Martinez had been consulting with sports performance specialists via radio, seeking explanations for the physiological readings she was observing. The sustained focus and precision we're documenting would normally be impossible to maintain for this duration, she reported. Peak performance states typically last minutes, not the extended period we're observing. This suggests either exceptional mental conditioning or natural capabilities that exist outside normal human parameters. Target number 12 at 700 meters required engaging from a prone position with limited visibility due to terrain features. Most competitors were taking extra time to establish proper sight lines and account for the modified shooting angle, but Ellie's engagement followed the same rapid pattern that had characterized her entire performance. The target impact was confirmed within 30 seconds of her arrival at the position. Master Sergeant Rivera had stopped pretending to continue his own shooting and was openly documenting what he recognized as potentially the greatest individual marksmanship performance in military history. "She's not just shooting perfect scores," he observed to the growing group of spectators around his position. "She's doing it at speeds that suggest she can see solutions that the rest of us have to calculate, and she's doing it with equipment that should be limiting her performance." Staff Sergeant Chen was analyzing Ellie's technique through his spotting scope, trying to understand how she was achieving results that seemed to violate fundamental principles of precision shooting. Her sight picture acquisition is instantaneous, her environmental assessment appears to take seconds rather than minutes, and her trigger control shows no hesitation or adjustment, he reported. "It's like watching someone who has perfect knowledge of every before she even settles into position." The international observers were beginning to discuss the broader implications of what they were witnessing for military marksmanship training and competition standards. Captain Morrison noted that traditional European training methods emphasize methodical, deliberate shooting techniques specifically because rapid precision was considered impossible to achieve consistently. "If what we're observing can be taught or replicated, it would revolutionize military marksmanship training worldwide," he commented. Lieutenant Kane's performance had deteriorated to the point where completing the course within the time limit was becoming questionable. His sabotage plan had backfired completely, affecting his own concentration and shooting ability while having no apparent impact on his intended target. Every perfect shot from Ellie's position represented both a failure of his plan and a demonstration of abilities that made his own achievements seem ordinary. Target number 13 at 900 meters presented challenging crosswind conditions that had been causing problems for other competitors throughout the morning. Several shooters had recorded marginal hits due to wind compensation errors, while others had used multiple shots to achieve acceptable accuracy. Ellie's single-shot engagement resulted in another perfect center hit accomplished in under 35 seconds. Technical Sergeant Johnson was beginning to attract attention from competition officials due to her observations about ammunition usage patterns. "Sergeant Ross has fired exactly 13 rounds and achieved 13 perfect hits," she reported. "Every other competitor has used sighting shots, ranging shots, and follow-up shots. Her ammunition efficiency is unprecedented in competitive shooting." The weather conditions were continuing to deteriorate as predicted, with increasing wind variability and thermal effects that were making long-range shooting significantly more challenging. Captain Torres announced updated environmental conditions that had caused several competitors to modify their shooting techniques and timing. "Current conditions represent some of the most challenging environmental factors we've seen for this competition," he reported. But Ellie's performance remained unaffected by the increasingly difficult conditions. Target number 14 at 1100 meters was engaged and struck perfectly despite crosswinds that were causing significant problems for other shooters. Her environmental assessment and wind compensation appeared to be happening so rapidly that observers couldn't detect the calculation process that should have been visible. Range Master Sergeant Kim was beginning to realize that he was witnessing something that would require official documentation and investigation. "We need to preserve all telemetry data, environmental readings and equipment specifications for this performance," he instructed his staff. "What we're documenting today will likely be studied and analyzed for years to come." Dr. Martinez's final biometric assessment was showing readings that would require peer review and verification. "The sustained optimal performance state we've documented exceeds anything in the sports psychology literature," she reported. "This will require extensive analysis to understand and potentially replicate." As Ellie approached target number 15 at 1000 meters, the impossible had become routine, but the impact on everyone present was growing stronger with each perfect shot. 4 targets remained, and the growing crowd of observers was beginning to understand that they were witnessing not just exceptional marksmanship but a performance that would redefine understanding of human capability with precision weapons.
The final phase of the championship course had arrived, and what had begun as a competitive shooting match had transformed into something resembling a demonstration of capabilities that seemed to transcend human limitations. 15 perfect shots in record time, with 4 targets remaining, and a growing audience of military personnel who had abandoned their regular duties to witness what was clearly becoming a historic moment in military marksmanship. Target number 15 at 1,000 meters represented the beginning of the course's climactic challenge, where maximum precision met deteriorating environmental conditions that had been defeating experienced shooters throughout the morning. The wind patterns at extreme range had become increasingly unpredictable, with thermal effects creating invisible barriers that could deflect bullets by several feet at impact. Lieutenant Kane's situation had deteriorated beyond mere competitive failure. His own shooting had become so erratic that range officials were beginning to question whether he was experiencing equipment problems or psychological pressure that was affecting his performance. The irony of his position, having sabotaged another competitor's equipment while watching his own performance collapse, was becoming increasingly apparent to observers who were noting the contrast between his struggles and Ellie's continued perfection. "She's maintaining perfect accuracy under conditions that are defeating shooters with decades of experience," Master Sergeant Rivera observed as he watched Ellie settle into position for target 15. "The wind compensation she's making should require calculations that take minutes to complete, but she's acquiring targets and engaging them faster than most people can read environmental conditions." The crack of Ellie's 15th shot echoed across the range with the same authoritative precision that had characterized her entire performance. The spotting scope confirmation came within seconds, another perfect center hit, achieved in under 30 seconds despite environmental conditions that had been causing problems for Olympic-level marksmen. 15 targets, 15 perfect hits, with 3 remaining targets standing between her and a performance that would rewrite competitive shooting records. Range Master Sergeant Kim was documenting everything for what he knew would become an extensively analyzed event. "In 32 years of competitive shooting supervision, including Olympic trials and international championships, I have never witnessed sustained precision at this level," he reported to competition headquarters. "We are documenting performance standards that exceed anything in the historical record." Dr. Martinez. Biometric monitoring had attracted the attention of military medical researchers who were consulting remotely about the physiological data being collected. "The sustained focus and precision control we're measuring should be impossible to maintain for this duration," reported Colonel Sarah Mitchell from the Army Medical Research Command. "Peak human performance typically occurs in brief intervals, not the extended period we're documenting." Target number 16 at 800 meters required a position change to elevated terrain with modified sight lines and different environmental conditions. Most competitors had been using significant time to re-establish their shooting position and account for the changed circumstances, but Ellie's transition maintained the same fluid efficiency that had characterized her entire performance. Staff Sergeant Chen had been analyzing Ellie's shooting technique through high-powered optics, trying to understand how she was achieving results that seemed to violate established principles of marksmanship. "Her environmental assessment appears to be instantaneous," he reported. "What should require extensive observation and calculation is happening so rapidly that it suggests either supernatural ability or understanding of environmental factors that exceeds anything in traditional training." The international competitors had essentially stopped their own shooting to observe what they were recognizing as potentially the greatest individual marksmanship achievement in military history. Sergeant Major Weber from the German Army was providing commentary to European military officials via radio. "What we are witnessing challenges fundamental assumptions about human capability with precision weapons," he reported. "This performance will require analysis by ballistics experts and sports performance specialists." Captain Morrison from the British Army had been documenting Ellie's technique for analysis by Commonwealth shooting specialists. "Her method appears to combine mathematical precision with instinctive environmental reading in ways that shouldn't be possible," he observed. "Traditional training emphasizes choosing between rapid engagement and precision accuracy because combining both was considered impossible." The 16th shot rang out across the range with the same confident precision that had marked every previous engagement. The impact was confirmed as another perfect center hit, achieved despite environmental conditions that continued to worsen throughout the morning. 16 perfect shots, 2 targets remaining, and a performance that was approaching mathematical impossibility in terms of sustained precision. Technical Sergeant Johnson was providing ammunition consumption data that added another layer of amazement to the performance documentation. Sergeant Ross has fired exactly 16 rounds and achieved 16 perfect hits, she reported. Her ammunition efficiency represents a 100% hit rate with 0 waste rounds, which is unprecedented in competitive shooting history. Lieutenant Kane's performance had degraded to the point where range officials were considering medical evaluation to ensure he wasn't experiencing a health emergency that was affecting his shooting ability. His sabotage plan had backfired so completely that he was now the subject of concern while his intended victim was approaching legendary status. The scope adjustments that were supposed to ruin Ellie's performance had had no detectable impact on shooting that seemed completely independent of equipment limitations. Environmental conditions continued to deteriorate as meteorologist Captain Torres provided updates that had caused several competitors to modify their shooting strategies significantly. Wind conditions are now exceeding normal competition parameters, he announced. Current environmental factors would typically result in competition suspension under standard protocols, but Ellie's performance remained unaffected by conditions that were defeating experienced marksmen throughout the range. Her approach to target 17 at 1200 meters followed the same rapid, confident pattern that had characterized every previous engagement. The extreme distance combined with challenging environmental conditions represented the most difficult shot of the entire course. Range officials were beginning to discuss the historical significance of what they were documenting. Chief Warrant Officer Stevens was coordinating with competition headquarters to ensure that all performance data was being preserved for official record keeping. "We are documenting what appears to be the greatest individual marksmanship performance in military competition history," he reported. "This will require verification and analysis that exceeds our normal post-competition procedures." The 17th shot execution was flawless, with target acquisition, environmental compensation, and trigger control happening in perfect sequence despite conditions that had been defeating other shooters throughout the morning. The spotting scope confirmation came with the same certainty that had marked every previous shot perfect center hit, achieved in record time under the most challenging conditions of the entire course. 17 perfect shots, 1 target remaining, and a performance that was transcending competitive shooting to become something approaching legend. The final target would determine whether Ellie Ross achieved mathematical perfection or merely extraordinary excellence, but everyone present understood that they had already witnessed something that would be studied and discussed for decades to come.
The final target stood at 900 meters, like a monument to everything that separated good marksmen from legendary ones. Target number 18 represented not just the conclusion of the most challenging military marksmanship course ever designed, but the potential completion of a perfect performance that had shattered every existing standard for precision shooting under competitive conditions. The crowd of observers had grown to include personnel from across Fort Benning who had abandoned their regular duties to witness what was clearly becoming a historic moment. Ellie approached the final firing position with the same methodical calm that had characterized her entire performance, but everyone watching understood that this single shot carried weight beyond mere competition. 17 perfect hits in record time, achieved with equipment that had been deliberately sabotaged under environmental conditions that had defeated Olympic-level marksmen throughout the morning. 1 shot remained between her and mathematical perfection. Rangemaster Sergeant Kim found himself holding his breath as he observed the final target engagement through his spotting scope. "In 32 years of supervising competitive shooting, I have never witnessed anything approaching this level of sustained precision," he said quietly to the other officials. "We are about to witness either the completion of the greatest marksmanship performance in military history, or the kind of near-perfect achievement that would still rank among the most exceptional shooting ever documented." Lieutenant Kane watched from his firing position with a mixture of dread and fascination as the competitor he had tried to sabotage prepared for the shot that would either validate or destroy his understanding of marksmanship. His own performance had collapsed so completely that finishing the course was no longer realistic, while his intended victim was approaching perfection that would make his sabotage attempt look petty and ineffective. The environmental conditions for the final shot were the most challenging of the entire course. Crosswinds at 900 meters were gusting unpredictably, thermal effects were creating invisible atmospheric disturbances, and the afternoon sun was beginning to create heat mirage that could affect target identification and ranging. Under these conditions, even a successful hit would represent exceptional marksmanship. Dr. Martinez's biometric monitoring was registering readings that defied every established understanding of human performance under extreme pressure. Her physiological indicators show someone entering an even deeper state of focused calm as the pressure increases, she reported to military medical researchers. This represents the exact opposite of normal stress responses and suggests performance capabilities that exist outside documented human parameters. Master Sergeant Rivera had positioned himself where he could observe both Ellie's shooting technique and the target impact simultaneously. She's approaching this final shot with the same confidence and precision that marked every previous engagement, he noted. There's no indication of pressure or awareness that she's attempting something historically significant. Staff Sergeant Chen was documenting Ellie's final target acquisition through high-powered optics, trying to preserve every detail of technique that had produced unprecedented results. Her sight picture establishment is instantaneous, environmental assessment appears to take seconds, and trigger control shows no hesitation despite the magnitude of what she's attempting, he observed. The international competitors had gathered as close to Ellie's position as range safety allowed, recognizing that they were witnessing something that would be studied and analyzed by marksmanship experts worldwide. Captain Morrison from the British Army was providing live commentary to Commonwealth military officials. The final shot of what may become the greatest individual marksmanship performance in competitive history is about to be attempted, he reported. Technical Sergeant Johnson was maintaining precise records of ammunition consumption that would become part of the official documentation. If Sergeant Ross achieves a perfect score, she will have done so using exactly 18 rounds of ammunition, one per target, which represents perfect efficiency that has never been achieved at this level of competition, she noted. The crowd of observers had grown silent as Ellie settled into her final shooting position. Military personnel from across the base had gathered to witness what they understood might be a once-in-a-lifetime demonstration of human capability with precision weapons. The normal sounds of base activity had faded as attention focused entirely on the final moments of an extraordinary performance. Environmental conditions continued to challenge even experienced shooters, with meteorologist Captain Torres reporting wind and thermal conditions that exceeded normal competition parameters. Current atmospheric factors would typically result in competition postponement, he announced. The fact that precision shooting is continuing under these conditions makes the documented performance even more remarkable. Ellie's final target acquisition followed the same rapid, confident pattern that had characterized every previous shot. Her environmental assessment appeared to happen instantaneously, her sight picture establishment was smooth and certain, and her trigger control showed no indication of pressure or hesitation despite the historical significance of the moment. The 18th shot rang out across Fort Benning's marksmanship range with the same authoritative precision that had marked every previous engagement. The bullet's flight path carried 17 perfect shots worth of expectation and the hopes of everyone who had witnessed an impossible performance approaching mathematical perfection. The impact sound at 900 meters came within seconds of the rifle report, followed by Range Master Sergeant Kim's spotting scope confirmation that would either complete history or create legend. The words that followed would be repeated and analyzed for decades: perfect center hit. 18 targets, 18 perfect shots, course completed in record time. The explosion of cheers and applause that erupted from the assembled observers reflected not just appreciation for exceptional marksmanship, but recognition that they had witnessed something that transcended competitive shooting to become a demonstration of human capability that would be studied and referenced for generations. Ellie Ross had achieved mathematical perfection under conditions designed to defeat the world's best marksmen, using equipment that had been deliberately sabotaged in record time that shattered every existing standard. Lieutenant Kane's sabotage had not only failed completely, it had triggered the most extraordinary display of marksmanship skill ever documented in military competition. His attempt to expose what he considered an unqualified competitor had instead revealed shooting abilities that redefined understanding of what was humanly possible with a precision rifle. As Ellie stood and cleared her weapon, completing the safety procedures that concluded her historic performance, the crowd of military personnel, competitors and officials began to understand that they had witnessed something that would change military marksmanship forever. 18 targets, 18 perfect hits, achieved in record time under impossible conditions, a performance that proved preparation, skill and determination could overcome any attempt at sabotage. The marksmanship range at Fort Benning had transformed from a competitive shooting venue into something resembling a historical landmark. Word of Ellie's perfect performance had spread throughout the base with the speed that only accompanied truly extraordinary events, and military personnel from every unit were arriving to witness the aftermath of what was already being called the greatest individual marksmanship achievement in military history. Range Master Sergeant Kim was coordinating with multiple agencies to ensure that every aspect of the performance was properly documented and verified. We need complete ballistics analysis, environmental data verification, equipment inspection, and witness statements from all officials, he instructed his staff. This performance will be studied and analyzed for decades, and we need to ensure that every detail is preserved for official record keeping. Lieutenant Kane's situation had become increasingly uncomfortable as the magnitude of his sabotage failure became apparent to everyone present. His own performance had been so poor that he hadn't completed half the required targets, while the competitor he had tried to destroy had achieved mathematical perfection. Range officials were beginning to notice the correlation between his unusual behavior during equipment preparation and his subsequent performance collapse. Martinez was consulting with military medical researchers and sports performance specialists worldwide about the physiological data she had collected. The sustained optimal performance state we documented exceeds anything in the scientific literature, she reported to Colonel Sarah Mitchell from the Army Medical Research Command. The biometric readings suggest human performance capabilities that will require extensive study to understand and potentially replicate. Master Sergeant Rivera approached Ellie as she completed her post-shooting equipment checks, his expression reflecting a mixture of professional respect and personal amazement. Sergeant Ross, in 15 years of competitive shooting, I have never witnessed anything approaching what you just accomplished, he said. You didn't just win this competition, you redefined what we thought was possible with precision weapons. The international competitors were gathering around Ellie's position with the fascination of professionals who had just witnessed their understanding of marksmanship fundamentally challenged. Captain Morrison from the British Army spoke for the group. What you achieved today will be studied in military academies worldwide. You've proven that traditional assumptions about the limits of human precision shooting were simply incorrect. Staff Sergeant Chen was documenting every detail of Ellie's rifle and equipment for technical analysis by military marksmanship specialists. Her equipment is completely standard issue, he reported to range officials. No modifications, no special ammunition, no technological advantages that could explain the performance we witnessed. This appears to be pure shooting skill at a level that exceeds documented human capabilities. Technical Sergeant Johnson was providing ammunition consumption data that would become part of the official competition record. Sergeant Ross fired exactly 18 rounds and achieved 18 perfect hits, representing 100% accuracy with zero waste ammunition, she reported. This level of efficiency has never been achieved in competitive military marksmanship at any level of competition. The investigation into Lieutenant Kane's behavior was beginning to focus on the correlation between his pre-competition activities and his subsequent performance problems. Chief Warrant Officer Stevens was reviewing security footage of the equipment preparation area. We have documentation of unusual activity around Sergeant Ross's rifle during the mandatory equipment inspection period, he noted. This requires further investigation to determine if competition integrity was compromised. Military Times correspondent Jessica Walsh was coordinating with news organizations worldwide to report on what was clearly becoming an international story.
The performance we documented today represents the greatest individual achievement in competitive military marksmanship history, she reported. Sergeant Ross has achieved mathematical perfection under conditions that were designed to challenge the world's best marksmen. Environmental data analysis by meteorologist Captain Torres confirmed that shooting conditions had been among the most challenging ever recorded for competitive marksmanship. Wind patterns, thermal effects, and atmospheric conditions during the competition exceeded normal parameters for precision shooting, he reported. The fact that perfect accuracy was achieved under these conditions makes the performance even more remarkable. General Patricia Hayes, commanding officer of Fort Benning, arrived at the range to personally congratulate Ellie and observe the documentation process for what was clearly a historic achievement. Sergeant Ross, what you accomplished today brings honor not only to yourself but to the entire military marksmanship community, she said. This performance will be studied and remembered as long as soldiers carry precision weapons. The crowd of observers had continued to grow as word spread throughout the military community about the unprecedented performance. Military personnel, civilian contractors, and base families were gathering to witness the aftermath of what many were calling the greatest single demonstration of marksmanship skill ever documented. Dr. Martinez's preliminary analysis of the biometric data was attracting attention from researchers worldwide. The sustained focus and precision control we measured should be impossible to maintain for the duration we documented, she explained to gathered military officials. This represents human performance capabilities that exist outside current scientific understanding. Range officials were beginning the process of equipment inspection and verification that would confirm the legitimacy of the performance. Every aspect of Ellie's rifle, ammunition, and shooting accessories would be analyzed to ensure that no unauthorized modifications or technological advantages had contributed to her success. Lieutenant Kane's equipment was also being examined, but for different reasons. The investigation into his pre-competition behavior was revealing evidence of deliberate tampering with another competitor's equipment, sabotage that had not only failed to achieve its intended purpose but had triggered the most extraordinary marksmanship performance in military history. As the immediate celebration and documentation continued, everyone present was beginning to understand that they had witnessed something that would change military marksmanship training and competition forever. 18 perfect shots under impossible conditions, achieved with sabotaged equipment in record time, a performance that proved determination and skill could overcome any attempt at destruction. The story of Sergeant Ellie Ross and her perfect 18 would become legend throughout the military community, but more importantly it would serve as proof that exceptional capability could emerge from unexpected sources, and that sometimes the most devastating response to sabotage was simply to be better than anyone thought humanly possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.